I needed to contend with my relationship to feminism and to understand the relevance of our position as women in the fight against our own injustices, and to see how I may have taken the bait of what I think is one of the biggest psyops that's ever crossed our paths collectively, which is feminism. And that's not to say that it does not hold space for some very, very important energies of pain and intergenerational grief. But it's to recognize how this is being, in my world, it's called a louche ritual, right? How this is literally being harvested energetically. The emotional currency of the victim consciousness that is held by so many women right now in their righteousness, in their entitled anger, is actually being used and leveraged for a specific agenda. And I do think the war on masculinity is one of the very essential elements of the current agenda, because when you have emasculated, and I would go so far as to say energetically castrated men, you have a very vulnerable population. And when there aren't men at the helm to guide, direct, protect, then the capture of that population is secured. When as a man, you don't have other men at your back, you cannot man properly.
Right.
And as a woman, when you do not have not one man, but men at your back, you cannot be a woman. I actually think this is how we are designed to relate to each other across the gender divide.
Dr. Kelly Brogan is a psychiatrist who's dedicated her practice and her life to illuminating all of the miraculous processes that occur naturally within the human body and how to support those processes to yield the highest possible outcome of a thriving human being. And while we could talk about psychiatry, and I look forward to those conversations about the utilization of pharmaceutical meds versus natural means, in this podcast, we focus on one of the most powerful healing processes, which is the awakening of our own erotic life force energy. So in this podcast, we talk about the energies of dominant and submissive power exchange sexuality, and also the reclamation of these powerful forces of Eros and how they can actually, in her mind, which I agree with, help to heal the world. So enjoy this podcast with Dr. Kelly Brogan. Kelly,
Hello,
you're
friend.
back.
I'm back.
You've obviously built a reputation as someone who doesn't give a fuck about saying the things that you really feel to be true. And I just want to deeply honor you for that in the past 3 years, because all of us, I think at some point, had a flinch reflex come up where we're like, damn, I feel something, but I don't know if I should say it. And, I look to people like yourself as somebody who, right from the start, whether you had that flinch reflex or whether you didn't, you moved straight through it with absolute courage. So I just want to first honor you for that. And maybe be curious if you actually found in yourself a flinch reflex, because, we're going to get into some more bold and powerful words that we shared a little bit at breakfast.
So, yeah, I would definitely take issue with the framing of that in my experience, because there are things that I've chosen to do and express in my public life that have not felt courageous at all. They've felt literally necessary for my own safety, like my own experience of safety in the world. And most of those have fallen into the health freedom world, right? That for whatever reason, related to my early woundology, I feel safer in a world where I am positioned in a position of aggression, I guess, a stance of aggression towards the aggressor. And that is what my activism has sprung from. So it's not required any courage, like literally at all. It's almost more of a compulsion, I would say, and a way of meeting my needs that has been largely unconscious up until, I would say, like 5 years ago, when I started to look at how ugly the activism space can be and how unwell so many activists really are, and especially in their relationships and their homescapes, right? Like their lived environments. there's a lot of pain and a lot of anger and a lot of dysfunction in the life of an activist, and myself included. And when I started to look at that and think, wow, these are the people who are so sure that they know how the world is supposed to look, that they require a microphone to inform the masses about what needs to be, occurring and how it should be occurring, and that this is the road forward. And it's fueled by this sense of how things are going is bad, how things are going is wrong, and here is the path forward. But you might notice it's not often invitational, right? It's not like,
no, very self-righteous.
Right. It's not like here is how we can feel the beauty of our humanity. Like here is, so much of what you stand for, like here is where we can move towards so that we can settle into our skin. It's not that. It's fighting the bad daddy and the bad mommy. And when I started to, I guess, do the inner work of my covert intentions as an activist, and specifically an anti-pharmaceutical activist, I found like my fear of men at the root of it. And specifically my fear that I would be killed by a man who didn't like, my full expression, and one that I deeply sought approval from.
Now, do you locate that in simply your own life and lived experience, or do you, in your own belief system, actually see that extending back to the estimated 10 million witches that were burned for carrying wisdom about how to heal and wisdom of the spirit? And granted, potentially some small fraction were in practicing some kind of dark magic, which you can still find active in the Amazon and in many different cultures who have magical practices. Granted, but the majority, obviously, were just people who the church didn't like, and women who the church didn't like, women who harnessed their own inner power, women who had that kind of ferocity and courage and sensitivity to be able to be powerful forces in a world that wanted to dominate the feminine, dominate the earth, and dominate women. Do you find that some of this may be epigenetic, karmic, generational, or do you locate it mostly in your own life, or is it some combination of both?
I think of it as almost like physiologic, that it is the physiologic posture of a woman to live in vulnerability. The way that I move through the world, and I am not alone in this, is with an awareness, semi-consciously, I would say at this point, that any man who does not like how I am being can kill me with his bare hands. And that's my physiologic reality, And so that would influence my persona, my behavior, and my defensive strategies is sort of like, it's obvious, right? And I think that the role of sexual energy in that, and what you're referring to, I would categorize in sort of like the dark feminine realms, like the ways that a woman's deep essence and sort of this reservoir of power can be accessed for manipulation and strategy and self-protection, or in service, and particularly in service of the complementarity of, the masculine and feminine. Yeah, I would say this conversation also invokes the collective and personal relationship that we each have to our sexual energy, and the shame wall, that lies between this deep reservoir of transformational power and our persona that we've cultivated to navigate so many of the very real behavioral threats. And I know for myself that I used my sexual energy subconsciously to secure strategic positions of power with not only men, but people, right? With the world. And part of that involved concealing it strategically. And then part of it involved sort of like leaking it out here and there and securing a man's gaze so that I could recognize the terrain that I was playing in, and leverage that to get what I wanted. And this is the same relationship to myself that would bring forth an experience of constant conflict, struggle, and drama, right? So when we're in this inner warfare, this inner fragmentation, we experience, of course, the mirror on the outside. So the resolution of my identification, I guess, as an activist was also married to the emergence of a very different awareness and relationship to my own sexuality. They went hand in hand. And you couldn't otherwise explain that unless you see the impulse to focus outward on the world and the problems in the world to the exclusion of your own inner focus as a strategy to work small, like sort of play small, out of contact with this deeper dimension of yourself, because you don't know how to safely relate to it. I really like the work of Alexander Lowen, who's a psychiatrist who wrote a book called Fear of Life. And he talks about how it is that we get positioned and pit against our own sexual energy very, very early in life, right? Like as, a breastfeeding infant who bites his mom's nipple, and she's like, ouch, don't hurt mommy, right? Like these seemingly normative responses on the part of our parents. Stop jumping on the couch, like stop crying, calm down. So it's not even necessarily related directly to masturbation or
no, it's the erotic life force itself.
Yeah.
The desire to be full and coursing with presence and animated by what the Kabbalists would call Shekinah.
Exactly.
Right? Eros herself.
Right. So the span from healthy aggression all the way to just desire, right? Like, can I trust my impulses? Or, do I need to be in vigilance against my own native sense of what I should be offering to the space in front of me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this has driven you. And what's interesting is, for someone as well known for your stance on health freedom, really a lot of your content is you expressing your own liberation of your sexuality, right? It's you practicing your own pole dancing, not in an exhibitionist way, but as in a reclamation way. That's how I receive it. It's like you in your own reclamation as your offering of medicine. And as we talk today, it seems like that's where you're actually seeing the direction that we need to go, rather than anti-pharmaceutical. It's like pro-reclamation of Eros internally as what's seemingly the most powerful and most present for you. Is like, all right, how do we heal the world?
I recognized around this time that I started, and it coincided with, the past 3 years and this opportunity I felt I had to do some inner work, looking at my inner totalitarian, my inner authoritarian, the ways in which I was embodying that which I was finger pointing on the outside and saying, these powers shouldn't be, how dare they, right? Yeah. I found a lot of that energy in myself.
Yeah, part of the practice of even the Passover Seder is to identify, in the mystical realm, is to identify the inner Pharaoh.
Yes.
Right. Like find the inner Pharaoh and celebrate your own, liberation from the inner Pharaoh. Be your own, bring your own Moses energy and let my people free. Let my body, my sexuality, my personhood free.
Right.
Right. Like find that within yourself. Don't just celebrate that somebody did it, 3,000 years ago.
Right. Well, that's the resolution of victim consciousness, right? I'm a big fan of family constellation work. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's totally changed my life. And a big premise there is to work with perpetrators in your life and to say, I see myself in you, but like really fucking mean it. Right?
Yeah,
Not
course.
like, oh yes, we're all one. No, I see myself in you. And to truly engage that, you must reclaim a part of you that you've put into exile. And for very good reason, right? So another part of you has entrapped this part of you that has been unwelcome. And so when you reclaim that dimension of yourself, it always brings gifts because it gets reassigned to new tasks, in your life now that it's no longer holding the burden of this very old, fear or grief or shame. And for me, in my personal story, the relationship, I can't generalize, but the relationship to my own sexuality, my own sensuality, and integrating that into my public persona was the thing I thought would destroy me, right? So like you don't have to do anything, but you can choose to go to the place where you imagine you would be obliterated and just fucking see what happens. Right? Yeah. Just kind of, I know you know, right? And so the way for me was for me the place. And I would say that I am exhibitionist. I would say that actually I want to play with the attention that's a part of. It's a huge part of what motivates me is to explore, I'm a big fan of David Data's, and he talks about how the feminine essence requires to be witnessed, right?
Mhm.
So I enjoy being witnessed, and also I'm terrified of being witnessed. So it's that spectrum of like from invisibility to so much attention that my entire system would collapse under the imagined experience of getting the attention of all of these eyes that I think I want, right? And so
Mhm.
where do I find myself in that spectrum? And how do I recognize that I actually have limited capacity on both ends, right? That I have trouble tolerating feeling invisible, but that I also have trouble tolerating feeling like too many eyes are on me, right? So when you play with that in the projection space that is social media and the public world, you get to learn about the parts of yourself that are in agreement with your greatest critics.
Right.
And I often say, like, somebody's commentary is only a problem if a part of you agrees with them. And so I met parts of myself that imagined and probably held the belief for a long time that as soon as people saw more of me, they would burn me at the stake or they would reject me. And, that would never have happened through another means. Because I've run my mouth about so many topics. It's like, at this point, it's like I'm inured to that, to the intellectual provocateur,
Right.
archetype. So that's why this was a very potent landscape for me to begin to play in, because it introduced me to the parts of myself that said, like, whatever it is that your sexual and sensual energy represents, that's where and when and why you will be outcasts, right? Like that's where the rubber will meet the road, and you'll see that the whole thing was a house of cards. And that's why, if there was courage that I've experienced in my life, it's been in the past couple of years, like where I've grown, I guess, the capacity, I would call it a masculine container, to hold myself as I trust these like sometimes weird impulses, that I might have creatively to like make a weird video or put myself, even singing, or, doing something that I'm not good at, doing something that I'm just learning, because I've only ever done shit that I'm good at, like my entire curated life. So even just to play like in that childlike space of like singing, dancing, creating, and not, not being expert at it, not even aspiring to be, the humility and the sort of to like tenderness, like cringeworthy tenderness that can come with that, requires like that there is a masculine presence within me, like this strong spine that's like, no, baby, I got you, and I'm offering that like self-husbanding that makes it over time a practice of like, it's cool no matter what. Like I offer myself the experience of a good man,
There's a lot of brackets that I want to open up, but one of which is that concept that you can actually use social media as a tool for liberation rather than a tool.
It's a spiritual practice.
Right.
Yeah.
Rather than a tool for enslavement, which is everything that we're told. You're trapped by social media. You got to limit your time, put your phone down, all of this message about it. And like a real, shaman, like a real priestess, you go, no. This is a tool, and I'm going to claim it and use it as a tool for my own liberation, to expose myself, the vulnerable parts, love myself through that, be that loving divine father that says, I got you, baby. Don't worry about it. Like, you got this. And then go out there and use the cold, brisk wind of what might come on social media as a way to actually fortify that which you're trying to grow and evolve within yourself.
And
like that tool
myself.
is powerful.
Yeah, to meet these dimensions of myself, right? To meet I could just like list off so many of the things that I've read, that range from, you look like a man and you're anorexic and you're, a problem and a reckless endangerment of all those you say that you're helping, all the way to like, keep writing books and talking about nutrition. Nobody wants you to be doing this. What are you doing? To you're shilling for the patriarchy. I mean, just like a huge spectrum. And there were some that just slid right off my back. And there were some that I really had that existential terror that I had fucked up beyond repair. Like, now I've done it. Now I did the thing that I can't fix. Like, I have no tools in my kit to undo this. And that thing is me. Like, I did me. And like, it's actually, this cardinal mark, that I can't erase. So it goes that deep if you want it to. And a lot of what I learned was around, sister woundology, if you will. Like I don't get comments from men. Maybe not a lot of them follow me. I don't know. But I really don't. I haven't noticed that. Like salacious comments about whatever. It's not like that. It's almost to a comment women who are disturbed by what they're experiencing. And I get it. I get it. Because I have been that woman who needs other women to stay in their lane, who needs other women to, find a box and don't open it. And I also can see that the impulse that one woman has to tell a woman how to live her life, if we could just examine that and maybe even play with the idea of a practice of relaxing that impulse, right? And I have 2 daughters, and this is a practice that I engaged years ago, just I guess semi-intuitively, I don't know, where I just decided, I'm never going to give them feedback that they don't ask me for, especially critical or negative feedback. Never. So, my daughter's going out the house in short shorts and a crop top, and I'm like, oh my God, you're going to get raped, or whatever the hell that reflexive programming is. I don't say a word. And it has resulted in an experience that my daughters have given me the feedback around where they feel really free,
and they
to
trust
be.
you. And they trust you to tell whatever is actually coming up. I think that's one of the big misunderstandings. And I'm not a parent yet, so but I was raised in a way where my parents trusted me, and I could share anything that was coming up. I could say like, yeah, I'm going out and I'm going to go, drink a bunch and do this thing and whatever. It didn't matter what the context was. I could share it and they'd be like, all right, well, here's what you got to look out for. Here's, driving, obviously. Call me anytime. I'll wake the fuck up. I'll pick you up. This is pre-Uber, right? So like, it was always this place of trust where no matter what I was doing, no matter where I found myself in, it wasn't going to be some draconian punishment that met me. It was going to be, all right, this is what happened.
Yes.
I got you. Like, let's figure this out. And so in that context, I was able to actually assess and really learn from my parents and trust them.
Exactly. Yeah. I had a moment. I have an almost 14-year-old, and at the beginning of what do I call it? Pandemic? What do I call it on the show? I don't know. Whatever of the thing. I decided to get off of my smartphone. Mostly because I felt a lot of shame around my usage habits, where I was like trying to sneak like work in the bathroom, like while my daughters were like in the other room, or I would have like one of my daughters be like, mama, and I'm like on this thing. It felt shitty, right? Sure. And yes, there's all the like privacy stuff, but that was the real reason. Like I just kind of wanted to challenge myself and see what would happen. So I got on like a hipster flip phone for a couple of years, 2.5 years, and really explored like that kind of lifestyle, right? And so at the tail end of this exploration, my daughter, they didn't have phones at all, came to me and she said, Mama, I want an iPhone. I was like, well, of course you're not getting an iPhone. We don't have iPhones in this house. And, and don't you know about the man? And don't you know about data mining? And absolutely not. And no, of course I didn't say that, but like that went through me. And I also felt her energy, and I felt this is a moment like for my lineage. It makes me want to cry. For my lineage, like, fuck. Like, and I recognized the moment, and I felt so psyched that I recognized the moment. And I said, I'm going to get back to you. And I talked to my best girlfriend, and she was like, Kelly, this is it. Like, she's here to do her life. And I just saw this like fork in the road, and I saw, okay, I can dominate her, empower over her, and just pay forward the entire experience of my mother line, like yet again, all the work I've done. And like, it's going to be exactly the same thing where I know better than you how to you, right? Like how to do you. I know better. And this kid, so I have a collection of like highly conspiratorial material called the Sovereignty series, right? And my daughter edited the transcripts of it. Like she knows what's up, okay? Like she's super, super awakened. So either I go down that path, or I recognize that I can trust her, and she can start to build a seriously authentic and integrated relationship to her inner compass now at 13, right? And so she has an iPhone. right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was like busted all these programs inside of me that were like, yes, but I do know better in this instance, in that instance. And I do think because we don't initiate adolescence, it's these little experiences that we have as parents where your child is like looking you in like soul to soul and saying like, do you actually love me? Or are you here only like for your own safety and to secure the parameters of your fear-based, paradigm?
Yeah, and you use the word love, but the word see in the avatar sense is actually in some ways an even more powerful expression of that.
See,
Because
feel, hear me.
it's like really to like, and when they say, that's one of my favorite parts of the whole mythology of the avatar is that their sacred phrase is, I see you.
Yes.
I see you.
And you are separate from me.
Yep.
You are not a narcissistic extension. You are not in service of my own need meeting, that you can live in a separate reality. And I will cross the bridge from my reality to yours and visit with yours with curiosity and interest. Like all of that was packed into like, Mama, I want an iPhone. And, she said to me, I am at an age or a stage, I can't remember, but regardless, she said, I'm at a stage, let's say, where I know what works for me. And I was like, yes, you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you are. And the truth is, I do trust her.
Yeah, and the absolute audacious condescension to think that you actually know from somebody else's perspective what's best for them. You may have some ideas, and the discussion and the conversation about it in a loving way might actually illuminate some things that were in the darkness or in the shadow, but doing that from that place of radical love and trust and saying like, have you looked at this? Have you looked at this? Cool. This is it. But I trust you because you're the only one that can see through your own eyes.
With tech and with food, it's been really tough. In so many other arenas, like with stress or, friendships, it's been actually really easy. But with tech and food, it's been hard to know, where is the moment where like, I don't actually know better and they have to build this relationship if they're going to actually be empowered, self-aligned women. And it comes through in these very subtle ways. Like the other day, I was online with my littler daughter somewhere at like a store or something. And she goes, Mama, I really like that woman's outfit. And I look over at her outfit and like the woman's wearing like literally jeans and like a white tank top. Okay. And so I'm like, oh yeah, it's pretty basic. Okay. That's like, that's like a fucking like Kelly loses 1 point in that little scenario.
Right.
Why? Because she's saying, Mama, here's my reality. And I had an opportunity to be like, hey, what do you like about it? And instead, I was like uncomfortable with her reality being different than mine because I didn't like the woman's outfit. And so I imposed my reality onto hers. I mean, it's like, seems trivial. It's just a fabric that you weave of all of these moments where you're powering over instead of honoring like the spirit of this child. And of course, we do this to each other. So now I wonder why these women are here inserting, imposing, and insisting that their reality is one that I need to conform to in order for them to feel comfortable.
Right.
They need me to stop dancing in a bikini on Instagram so they can feel comfortable and not have to experience the dimension of themselves that is just rattling around because of what they're seeing. Right. So it starts in these like humble origins,
Now let's play out a more complex scenario. Let's say your daughter comes to you and says, Mama, I want to get the COVID vaccine.
Oh, don't go there. I like literally every day, I'm like, you know what? I'm so grateful. It could be so much worse in that. So it could be so much worse.
Right. Like there's certain, I mean, some instances, would be real tough.
Oh,
real tough.
And I also believe that you only ever get what you can handle. And that's why I co-parent. My baby daddy and I like co-parent, I feel very well. And we are on the same page, even though we do not agree about a lot of stuff. And I'm like a way deeper conspiracy nut, not even deeper. I am and he's not, it's a kind of a thing. But somehow it works and we share values sufficiently where we've not had conflict around these things. And I think that's because I couldn't handle it probably if that were my, sort of seeming random lot. So if that
more
were
realistic,
to happen,
go ahead.
Well, I do think about it, but of course, especially in my world and in the culture I sort of, marinate in around health freedom. That is the biggest fear. And I know so many people who are encountering that, right, in their lived reality. I actually don't know anyone who's been jabbed. I literally don't know a person. That's how insular my reality is and how maybe like curated it is in ways. So for that to enter in such an intimate space, I would have to frame it. I wrote in my last book this phrase I actually self-soothe with often, which is that suffering ends where meaning begins. And so I would probably meaning make around that pretty quickly and see that it's like a cardinal opportunity for my lineage, for myself, and for this, incredible being in front of me to do things differently. And I probably would take the invitation, having practiced with the iPhone, to express, to lean in and to express curiosity and to learn, like actually listen. We have this programming, or I'll speak for myself, I have this programming that listening costs me something, right? That it costs me something I don't want to pay sometimes to just listen, just take in what somebody is saying, even if I don't agree with it. And part of that is because of, what psychologists call enmeshment trauma, which is this idea that you must agree if you want connection and security, right? So you must agree. So if I'm encountering someone with whom I don't natively agree, then I put up that defensive wall, that posture. But does it actually cost me? I had a little experience the other day. I'm taking my kids on a trip, just like me and the girls, right? Internationally. And my dad, expressed his care in such a way as to say that he wasn't sure it was like a safe idea. It was a great idea to be traveling where we were going to travel. And I felt really triggered, right? I felt really triggered by the text about this. And I noted in me that sort of dark feminine impulse to slay, right? And to threaten and shame him, right?
Shout out to Golly.
What up? Right? And so I got so far as like sending him an LOL, right? So to just sort of like subtly shame him about his concerns. And then I sort of like felt inside of me this kinesis around like, you better watch where you're stepping, because if you ever want to see these grandkids again, you better not like fuck with this territory, right? Like that's the kind of energy. It's like a punitive, shaming energy. And I know in my commitment to end the war with men, I know that that's not how I want to relate to any man, let alone my father, any longer. And it's not my conscious choice to shame and punish him for speaking in a way that I don't agree with, right? And so at another girlfriend, my other girlfriend, Ayla, helped me to see, in the moment, I have just the right women around me and just the right moments of my life like angels. And she helped me to see, like all that I had to say was, I'll consider it because I'm already considering it.
Right.
So what would it cost me to just offer him that and to allow him to feel seen in his way of loving me, right? Like his way of meeting his own needs, right? Which is to make sure that he's asserting this awareness into my field, whatever. And to just say, I'll consider it. It felt like so uncomfortable. And it's just because of like this practice of letting a reality into my field that I don't agree with, or that somehow feels like it undermines the security of my own reality. But there must have been a part of me that agreed with him and thought, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing as a mother. I'm putting my children in danger. This is why I need a husband, because I don't know how to navigate, all of that. That part, right, was holding the fear of the trigger, right? Like I had to agree with him or it wouldn't have bothered me.
Right.
I would have said, thanks, Dad. Thanks, for letting me know. We're cool. Like, and I went through this whole inner, defensive cascade because I don't want to feel whatever that part is holding, which is that I might, not know what I'm doing. I might be wrong about things. And that means I'm bad and all of that. Right. So to offer, I'll consider it is that same bridge, from my reality to his that actually costs me nothing and is already true. Right.
Just from my reflection, it's true but partial in that you had already considered it. So in a way, it feels like actually the truest thing is, I've taken that under consideration.
I am considering it.
Yeah, I've taken that under consideration. And, thank you for your concern.
Yeah.
I'll reassess I'll assess my thinking about it one more time to make sure. But I'm confident that we're going to be safe.
Right.
So it's like, it's also reminding him and encouraging him to realize like, hey, don't be silly. Like I already, like, obviously I thought about this. I'm not an idiot. You know what I mean? So I think there is some of that that's also important. I mean, I get that as a leader all the time. People will suggest things and sometimes be like, absolutely, I see what you're saying. I've considered that option and letting them feel heard, and then also reminding like, yeah, I got this. Like, I understand, I can see that. And sometimes there's things you can't see. And in that case, you go, wow, I didn't think about that. Give me a moment. Right. As you said, like, give me a moment. Let me think about it, and I'll get back to you and we'll assess this in real time or adjust.
Right.
Potentially. But yeah, that's a powerful example to show like the differences in the responses that can kind of come up when you feel that sense of trigger, that sense of something moving in your body. That when you have that self-awareness, there's so much that you can unpack about that.
Yeah, I've noticed, because I'm very interested in the victim triangle and the Karpman victim triangle, and aware of how it shows up. It's like the somatic sequence of it in my body. I can identify like, oh, I'm in the field, right? Like I feel this like clench in my chest, and then like heat up my neck, and then like I start to sweat under my arms, and I'm like, I'm here, I'm in the field. Like, what choices do I have, right? Because that's the antidote, right? We have choices, we have agency. And so most of my spiritual practice, I would say, in life is around not needing someone to be bad or wrong in order for me to exercise my power of choice. Mm-hmm. And if I am shaming and punishing in order for me to declare that I am right in what I'm doing, then I am fundamentally in disempowerment, right? And that's not where I choose to be consciously. So how can I recognize, the signs and symptoms early enough so that I can course correct? And one of the ways is to even reflect the positive intention, if you can actually perceive it, of the person who you would otherwise be in an adversarial dynamic with. And I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed, that when you can offer that first to someone, or in some way offer that you really see, their positive intent, you see, in ways their goodness, there's such a disarming that really diffuses what might otherwise be this eroticized entanglement, because, I call it the erotic caress of the enemy. It's whenever you get into that thing with someone, like it's like lovemaking. I mean, it like literally is that intensive an entanglement. And do you actually consciously want that with somebody who is offering you something you don't?
Some random person on Instagram.
Exactly.
Do you
want to
that
offer them that
kinky,
energy.
that kinky erotic entanglement where you get in
right.
you get all flustered and red in the face.
You're going to give it to them, right? Yeah. Or is it just for special people?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many examples of, and if people, as an invitation, like I invite you to imagine that thing which really triggers you the most, and that thing that's coming up, and then the opportunity to reframe that with a different perspective of sight. I think one thing that Regina Thomas-Hauer, Mama Gina, who's working with my wife, one thing that was discussed was the really kind of overt thirst trappy quote, kind of expression on Instagram, which is just show your ass, show your body, get some likes, this kind of thing. And recognizing that there's a pattern of judgment that comes from that. But what Regina was offering, and I wasn't there to actually like listen to it firsthand, so this is secondhand, so apologies if I didn't get it exactly right. But the essence of it was, well, this is just a young, juvenile expression of a woman getting into her power and understanding how she can actually use her sexuality in a powerful and potent way. It's just a young expression. So instead of all this judgment and all this shame and all the, I can't believe they're doing that, just showing their body off, all that, just recognize like, okay, she's moving through this version, this level of self-reclamation, this level, and maybe there's a lot of unconscious things that are going on there, but it reframes this kind of automated judgment of that thing into, yeah, all right, this is a young interpretation of that. Much like a young fighter is much more likely to get into a bar fight than a fucking seasoned veteran who knows how tough they are. And so if someone says, hey man, you're a pussy, they're like, haha, that's funny.
Right.
And just keeps, doesn't even
Flinch,
phase them, right? But the young fighter with an amateur record of, 2-2 is like, what did you say? I do MMA.
Right.
They go to fight it. But it's like once you start to actually really understand how powerful you are, all of these other judgments can kind of fall away. And you can, as you said, see that part in yourself. Like see where those younger impulses have been and maybe still even are. And that's like the deep wisdom of embracing the entirety of yourself and also having so much less to defend because
right. Well, because that defensive energy is the signature, right? How about it's not your business what another woman is doing on Instagram? It's like literally not your business. It's not your business. It's like her experience. And if you don't like it or if it bothers you, that's an amazing opportunity to meet the part of you that is holding the belief that you should never do that shit. Like, right? So if I don't like when I see a woman, posing on the beach in like a string bikini, which I'm sure I didn't like in the past, and I think I know better how she should live her life, then I am meeting the part of me that says, if you ever do that shit, you're canceled, right? Like, and then I get to explore like, what else is that part holding, right? Which is invariably some deep emotional, like embodied tissue level energy that can be alchemized. And so it becomes a practice. And that's why I use this like simple rubric, like enter through the upset. You don't like it? You feel upset? Great. You have this opportunity to meet yourself because it's like really not anyone's business how anyone else is living their life.
Amen. So we've talked about some of the ways that you use, social media, other people's reactions, your own judgments as a way to alchemize things within the self on this path of self-mastery, reclamation, actualization, all of these things, synonyms in different ways. One of the tools that you've really been going into is playing in the dominant submissive space, which includes and transcends sexuality, actually. It's an incredibly rich
energetic dynamic.
Yeah, that offers an unbelievable amount of opportunity to actually work through deep psychological patterns and claim aspects of yourself that you may have kept in the shadows, locked away like a gimp in the basement.
Yes, no pun intended.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have become very, very interested in this culture and in the paradigm of BDSM and conscious kink, and have been supported by my coach Whitney and friends in the exploration. And first, I needed to contend with my relationship to feminism. That was sort of the entry point for me, and to understand the relevance of our position as women in the fight against our own injustices, and to see how I may have taken the bait of what I think is one of the biggest Psy-Ops that's ever crossed our paths collectively, which is feminism, and specifically the recent wave. And that's not to say that it does not hold space for some very, very important energies of pain and intergenerational grief. But it's to recognize how this is being, in my world, it's called a louche ritual, right? How this is literally being harvested energetically. The emotional currency of the victim consciousness that is held by so many women right now in their righteousness, in their entitled anger, is actually being used and leveraged for a specific agenda, right? And so, if you look into the origins of the feminist movement, you might come across, some telltale, now it's probably not on YouTube anymore, but like, Aaron Russo talking to a Rockefeller, about the Rockefeller funding of the feminist movement, and not for the reasons that one might think, for the liberation of all women and their equal, right to vote, and to secure their position in the workplace. There's another lens that says it was to increase the pool of taxpayers, to double it actually, and to fragment the home, right? To remove women from the home so that their children could be industrialized in, what most people now understand who've looked at education is, the way you create automatons out of free spirits.
Right.
And so if that's what was behind it, and it was funded for, at least that primary reason, then what else have we fallen for? And I do think the war on masculinity is one of the very essential elements of the current agenda, because when you have emasculated, and I would go so far as to say energetically castrated men, you have a very vulnerable population. And when there aren't men at the helm to guide, direct, protect, then the capture of that population is secured. And so when we as women imagine that what we want is men cowering and apologizing, right? And we spit vitriol at them and, just entrap them in this utterly disorienting and confusing place of, it's like I could almost feel it in my body, like, what the fuck do I do, right? Like, I can imagine, empathically what it must be like as a man today. Like, how do I be? And obviously, you're doing your very significant part to blaze this trail. But the average dude is like, I don't know how to be. Do I apologize? Do I, get on a knee? Do I bow down? Do I take out my sword? What do I do? How do I do good? Right? Like, how do I be a good boy? And this posture that so many women have adversarially towards men, I do think is the greatest detriment to their own fulfillment, right? Because I was speaking at the Weston Price conference recently, and there was like 2,000 people there, and somebody was asking me about like gender politics and my perspective on it or whatever. And I said, just as a part of the answer, I was like, I don't know a woman who doesn't, let's say a heterosexual woman, who doesn't want to be well handled by a strong and powerful man. And literally this like sigh swept through the audience. It's almost like they could like almost like men and women alike. It's like they could feel like, oh yes, that's actually what I want. So if that's what you want as a woman, you cannot have that, right? If you are relating to a man that you are in a posture of disrespect, distrust, and otherwise like power over toward, it's just not available. Right. So that's not how you get what you want. So how do you get what you want? Are you just supposed to like revert to like, lipstick and eyelashes and like being your flirty, bubbly version of yourself and hope that works out, and that you're not like raped and abused, right? Like, we're just in this total state of warfare. And I think until we come into an understanding of the power of the technology of man-woman relating, and it's erotic, yes, but it's also societal, it's sociocultural, right? So the way that I relate to the man who, might pick up my suitcase and put it in the bin on the airplane is actually holofractal, right? Like, how I relate to him is how I relate to my father, is how I relate to my partner, is how I relate to my inner masculine. Right. So it's the healing of this polarity. And it starts with recognizing that if what we say we want is the safety that only men in a society can offer to the population, to the women, the children, and to the other men, right? Because, I'm obsessed with Viking shows recently, right? And so I watch these scenes, right, where like a man is in trouble, right? And his fucking dudes come to the rescue, right? Yeah. So when as a man, you don't have other men at your back, you cannot man properly.
Right.
And as a woman, when you do not have not one man, but men at your back, you cannot be a woman. I actually think this is how we are designed to relate to each other across the gender divide. And so this is obviously my bias. I'm not saying this is how it is. However, this is the lens that I started to look through. And then, of course, I saw, okay, like what else are some of the achievements of feminism? Birth control pill, medicalized birth, the all sorts of screenings to funnel you into the pharmaceutical based model of allopathy. I mean, I remember when I was in medical school, I was like very excited about the HPV vaccine and, was on birth control for 12 years, thinking that these are entitlements of my womanhood and are offerings to my experience as a woman. And I felt certain I would have an elective C-section because why would you have pain that you don't have to have? That's just stupid, right? So that consciousness, it creates the space and the conditions for a lot of other, at least from my perspective, highly disempowering engagements of the female body by a woman, right? So the way that I relate to birth as a woman, that defines my relationship to my own vital force energy, in my opinion, right? So if I am enculturated to believe, that a doctor knows better how I should birth a baby and that, my partner's emasculation at the hands of this doctor while I, circumcise that baby who's just been pried out of me, through a slit in my belly. And then this baby's early initiation into a system that will command his biology and his experience of his own human flesh, right, through fear. Well, that's quite an extraordinary, matrix to have established. And it starts with a woman relating to her own womanhood through the lens of conventional feminism. And so I really had to reckon with that, right? And to see, okay, so if feminism is a trap, then what's the way out? Like, how do I spring the trap and how do I begin to move forward? And it was really uncomfortable when I first started to explore things, The Surrendered Wife is a book that I read. And even the title, I was like, remember I was on the plane, I was like hiding the the cover. I was like, what the hell is this guy next to me going to think of what I'm reading, right? I still was in the days where I gave a shit. And I, when I read that book and I read about suggestions like, if your man asks you what you think, should I wear the blue shirt, honey, or should I wear the yellow shirt? That you should never take the bait and answer that question as a woman. Okay, I come from a relationship history of literally being the decision-making head of the household, right? Like I always knew best. And I have a very often easy, clear, lucid decision-making path. And so I would just offer my recommendations. And then I was consulted for my thoughts, right? And then I wonder, why I created conditions where I couldn't offer the respect and trust and admiration, that the men I've been with deserve.
So Surrendered Wife wasn't an erotic fiction novel. It was
dynamic. It's just about the dynamic. No, it's like a self-help.
I was going a different direction with that. So I was like, shirts? No, that doesn't sound erotic at all.
It's like a self-help thing. So this woman is in a shitty marriage and she just had this inspiration about how to fix her marriage. And she's like, I chose this dude. I'm going to actually relate to him like I respect him, right? And I'm going to stop, she didn't use this language, but mommying him, right? Because as a woman, you don't want to be with a man who takes your directives, guidance, and advice. You don't want to be with that man. You certainly don't want to fuck that man. So how do you orient yourself and subdue and transform the reflexes that you have to control him, right? And create the conditions of safety that you feel are not there, but you've chosen this man, so perhaps they are, or leave, right? And one of the ways you do that is you submit, right? And part of how you submit is to allow him to actually be the man in the relationship, to make the decisions, to initiate, to organize, to follow through, to exercise his integrity of word. And so what she says is when he asks, Laura Doyle is her name, when he asks you, what do you think? You say, whatever you think. And I have found that when I'm around strong men, that like falls out of my mouth. And I can't wait to not have to make the decisions. It's actually like deeply pleasurable and delightful, like to be in that polarity. So that is the polarity, but there's a participation and a cultivation of a certain kind of self-possession, actually, as a woman, that is required. It's not just like, oh, the king shows up and then you get to like have your amazing experience of a safe life. Of course, it requires that you orient towards yourself. You examine your reflexes that were previously keeping you safe, that are not serving your ultimate desire, which is to be in dynamic with men, empowering them. One of my teachers, Aubrey Marcus, calls it making a man bigger. Right. So how do you make a man bigger? He talks about how they have a green light and a red light, right? So you're literally like turning the green light on or turning the red light on with every single thing that you say. And how can you choose to turn a man's green light on? Well, it involves not diminishing him, not criticizing him, not deciding that you know better how he should man. It's the same premise, right? We've been talking about. And in doing that, you resolve a lot of the habit that we have as women to imagine that we know better. And honestly, maybe sometimes we do. But if you want a certain experience of that energy field, that bigger energy field that's holding you, right? Especially in the freedom world, I look at all these women, I'm like, you don't want to be free, bitch. You don't actually want that, right? Like you want a certain kind of containment, an experience of like the walls, the incredibly strong walls around you, right? Like the riverbank allowing your water to flow finally. And now it's not like stuck in some stagnant pond. Like you want that structure, you want that containment so that you can feel your own creative life force energy move. That's what we want, if I could generalize. And it's not to be like unbridled. And I mean, I'm telling you, that's, you know, as a single woman, that's not what I want, right? In so many ways. And so how do you engage that containment? First of all, it's being able to feel in your body when you're in the presence of a man who can actually offer that. And again, this could be like the dude at the gun range, you know, it could be your chiropractor, like it could be your partner and your lover. But to assess that, I have to be safe enough in my own system. So my inner man has to be online sufficiently so that I can then determine safety on the outside. And in the, you know, sort of neuropsych world, that's called neuroception, right? So I have to be able to see that what I'm looking at in the room, thinking might be a boogeyman, is like a pile of laundry, actually. So I am accurately perceiving reality on the outside and assessing safety in such a way that I'm not projecting. And then I can engage interoception. So I can scan my inner world for cues and information about whether or not this is actually an unsafe or a safe experience. And so as you practice, you know, this somatic work in your daily life, you get better at being able to feel in your body whether you're around a man who could provide that containment and safety or not. It's not a value judgment. It's just exercising your decision-making and your choice. Like, so your inner masculine is online. And so I've found that, you know, as I explore a lot of the erotic potential, first things first, right? Like first is understanding like how to unknit and unwind so many of the habits. Like another commitment I've had for, well, it's probably been a year now, is to never speak ill of men. And I was inspired by Aubrey Marcus around this as well. And you know, what that means is that, you know, when one of my girlfriends is in a shitty dynamic with some asshole, or she's talking about the dad of her kids who's being a douche or whatever, like I am in a practice of not colluding, you know, with her victim story and not like henpecking any man, including all of my exes, right? Like including the man on TV or the man in the other room, right? Like, how do I get into a practice where I am oriented towards respect or I shut up, right? Like one or the other if I can't provide. And again, this is like, it's an offering. And it's also simultaneously an offering to myself, right? Because whatever stories I have about what makes a man a bad man, I probably have a dynamic within myself that of self-judgment and, you know, self-reprimand that reflects, you know, that outer condemnation. So these simple practices and new ways of orienting that might seem like old-fashioned or even patriarchal can lead you to this place where you discover the potential of polarity play. And what is it to choose consensual domination? So we're talking about a lot of what I've learned through Amrapani is like that the history of humankind is marked by non-consensual domination. Literally every horrible thing that's ever happened. It could be described as non-consensual domination. So how do you reclaim that? How do you alchemize that? You do it through consensual domination that actually serves both parties simultaneously. So that's the mystery of complementarity. It's like you take the mask wearers and the non-mask wearers, the vaxxers and the non-vaxxers. You take these divide and conquer Hegelian dialectic polarities, and you find that mysterious place where we come into complementarity and we create something more beautiful and powerful than would have ever been available if we just dedicated ourselves and our energies to warfare. And so if you look at it through that holofractal lens of man-woman relating being really honestly the only relevant and accessible place to enter, right? Because I don't know, most of us who've figured out how to like fundamentally find this complementarity across health beliefs, right? Or political divides. I don't know a lot of people who've figured that out. In man-woman relating, there are people who've figured it out, right? Like we can do this and we can access it. And it just requires a reframe of some of the things we imagine would have cost us that are actually an investment in exactly what it is that we want, right? Because that's part of BDSM culture is like the awareness that when you create a safe container through consent, communication, and a deep commitment to care and coupling care with sex in a way that, right, most of us are not accustomed to, especially in the aftercare realm. Like, you know, you would be a bad dom if you drop your woman, right? And just sort of like go watch a golf game or whatever the hell. And so if you're invested in being good at what you do, it actually is in service, but it's also in service to what you get from that woman when she is submitted, right? You get fed by her Shakti, if you will, like you get fed by that. And so in this complementarity, both people's needs are being met simultaneously, even though it might look otherwise. And that is only possible when you pick a lane. So a lot of what I've been exploring is like, how do I pick a lane on the daily, right? So if I'm interacting with you or I'm interacting with him or whatever, am I in my sub or my dom? And Kazi Urbaniak has inspired me a lot in her work where she was a professional dom and she talks about like how you speak differently, right? If I'm in my dominant energy, which honestly, I probably mostly am with my kids or when I'm coaching, group coaching or something like that, and I just know, right? Like I know and I feel my spine and I know what's supposed to happen here. I will be in instructional energy and my sentences will start with you, right? You know, you're gonna pick up the car on Wednesday. Let me know if you need anything, you know, to make that happen. Whereas if I'm in my submissive, which is going to be most of the place I want to rest if I am oriented towards a feminine essence polarity, then most of my communications about what I want are going to be from I. It's invitational. And I'm going to offer the person I'm talking to a role in the fantasy that I am, you know, creating a vision for in front of them, right? So you actually create the conditions for the fulfillment of what you want through the empowerment of the person who can make that happen. And you talk about, you know, like it would feel so incredible to me if we could go out to dinner together because every time I'm around you, I just feel like alive. And I would love it if you would make time for me on Thursday. Are you available for that? Right? Like it's just a care. It's a consciousness that I bring to my communications that when normally I would honestly, even speaking to a girlfriend, I might be like, hey, you free Thursday? Let's go somewhere. Right? So it's an awareness of which energy am I in? Which lane am I in? And if I want to be, you know, if I want to have that experience of containment, and another concept I really love from the BDSM world is permission field. If I want to have a really big permission field to just bring all of who I am to the table and to explore and play and get weird and messy and bring the taboos out of the closet, then there is a certain comportment that is my responsibility. There's a lane that I occupy and I don't cross the line, the white lines. And learning about that really organizes these inner polarities out of this like mushy, like mixed up terrain of like this like, am I a boss bitch? I'm a fucking queen. I'm a queen, right? You know, or like this weird place that we've landed, a lot of us as women, where we really don't know how to be to feel safe. We don't know how to source safety from our environment. And fundamentally, like we don't know how to get what we want. And all of that can be organized, like when you start to explore these conditioned, you know, I think agenda-driven dimensions of the ways that we have been pit against each other across the gender divide.
So many powerful concepts illuminated in that in that discussion. And I guess I'll just speak from my own experience about what the dominant submissive culture has really taught me. For one, it's allowed me a reclamation of my own dark masculine.
Yes.
My own dominance, my own...
Can't dom without it.
Barbarian, Viking, you know, warrior, destroyer, that energy, which is actually harmful and toxic when it's actually non-consensual.
That's right.
But in the consensual space, I get to locate that within myself and allow the snarl to come and the horns to be shiny and pointed and every aspect of me to come out. At the same time, that's the demon. At the same time, the angel touches the point because I'm listening so carefully, so exquisitely.
You're attuned, yeah.
To whoever is in the submissive role. So the submissive then becomes the focus of my rapt attention. And while that demon can come out and play, the angel in me is listening to the subtext of every goosebump on her body, every welt that might rise, every slight welling of tears if it goes that direction, or expression of ecstasy if it goes that. And then there's this balance of finding the edges and playing with the energy that actually comes in, which teaches me like the deepest listening. Like I'm never listening more deeply than when I'm in a dominant role.
Which
right?
is your gift as the masculine, is
Right.
where you're putting your attention. Right. So you're offering that, but it's also when you feel most empowered.
Yep.
It's like in that offering. And I just love listening. It's just, yes, this is the way. I actually think this, and we were joking this morning, like, this is what will save the world. Like, this is the way, because the castration, right? You talk about like your dark masculine, right? Like I prefer like I guess like kind of edible terminology of like the castration by the devouring mother, right? Like the shadow mommy. And like, I'm not a boy, I don't have boys. However, I've made a study of what goes on when a boy begins to express his aggression early in life, and his mother has been wounded by men in her life, and she's fucking terrified of now her own son, right? And she castrates him figuratively, hopefully, and she requires that he submit and subdue himself and his energy for her safety, right? So he has to be a good boy, and he has to not run around the house too loud and not stab the squirrel or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Like and she doesn't typically offer him, and often the father is not in a, presence to do so, a healthy outlet for that aggression, right? So early athletics or martial arts or whatever. And instead, what happens to boys who express too much energy? They get in trouble, right? They're bad boys who are, now confused about their own vital force. And they grow, and these boys grow into men. They're not initiated, and they have a relationship to their own predatorial aggression that is an essential part of their humanity, that is so distorted and inverted and confused and corrupted that there's no way for them to literally be embodied sufficiently to relate to anyone in their life, let alone claim anything in their life.
And evil festers in the dark, damp places. And when you have shame creates this bubble where you don't want to look at some aspect of yourself. And we see this so prevalently, where people are unwilling to acknowledge their own inner darkness.
Of course.
And so in the shame around the darkness that we all have. As Rumi says, we're not a drop in the ocean, we're the ocean in a drop. We're all of her, all of us, male, female. We all have the Kali or the Shiva, the destroyer. We all have that within us. And if we can't locate that, that doesn't mean that it goes away. It means that it festers.
No, it means you watch the fucking news and you watch all about like the murderers and the killers and you get off on that. It's actually arousing to people. That's why they engage in like the fear porn of modern media culture, because it's actually enlivening. They get a little accessible, dimension of access to that place, their own inner darkness, and it feels controlled. But, this is often why, in relationship, if you can't access that through and with your partner, you'll find it somewhere else.
Yeah.
You'll access it somewhere else. And that relationship to their own inner aggressor, their own inner predator on the part of a man, I'm not sure how a man could ever touch something other than the chaos of wanting to annihilate themselves and exit this plane without that. Like it's that essential. I'm not going to tell you how it is to be a man, but I'm pretty sure that's like essential part of making a claim on your life, of choosing life over death, literally. And it starts with claiming and taking what you want. And Betty Martin's work, if you've heard of her work around the wheel of consent, has been like really helpful for me because she talks about giving and receiving, taking and allowing, and how they've all gotten, again, disorganized, right, within us, right? When I'm with my lover and I think, oh, my pleasure comes from giving him pleasure. Like how many of us think that a lot of us, right? Like that's like, especially, well, I won't say especially, but as a woman, a lot of the women I know relate to their own enjoyment of sex through their partner's enjoyment, right?
Well, which can be healthy.
It can be, but that's a more mature dimension.
Yeah, slide into the mutuality of eros that you're feeling.
She would argue that's advanced.
Yeah.
First, you have to start with what you want, what feels good to you. And Jaya's work, Erotic Blueprints, is so helpful when it comes to this. Like, learn, do you like this touch or you like this touch, right? Like, learn the basics of your own body and your own sensuality, and then get comfortable with taking touch, right? So again, that's that predatorial claim. And most of us don't have an experience of taking touch with another person or being allowing, apart from pets. Right. So I take touch from my cats I take touch from your cats.
Right.
I take touch from cats all the time, right? Like, or pets, where I'm touching them, not for their pleasure, for mine. But for most of us, we have, because it's been tagged as sort of that predator energy, like I'm taking this from you, we don't have a healthy intimacy with our own taking of touch or taking of pleasure. And so to reclaim that requires that you be in practice and play, and BDSM offers this extraordinary framework for this, to begin to explore, especially as a dom, what it is to take touch, right? So if you are going to engage in impact play with your partner, you better like it. Because if you don't actually enjoy taking that from her, like if you don't enjoy spanking her, not just because she likes it, then the potential alchemy there is limited, right? So it's this amazing intersection of what it is to take and also give simultaneously. And what you're describing requires that like incredible focus, right? So for doms, it's often described as like a flow state, and then you have this opportunity to offer your subspace, right? This like yoga and meditation level experience of hypofrontality where you literally pixelate into the void, and you can have this union with a dimension of yourself that's very hard to access on the daily.
I would say that there's a pre-step, even if a man who's listening right now, or a woman, if someone's interested in entering in and learning through kind of the dom channel. And I think it's actually important. And I had an experience being a submissive as well. So there's lots of learnings that are available. But for me, the dominant channel is the channel where I find my eros and I actually learn the deeper lessons. Not that the other lessons aren't there, but it's what I'm allured to.
Totally.
But prior to that, I think my athletic background and martial arts background and all this has allowed me to compete in a way where I am free to not only beat my opponents, but to completely demoralize them, right? Like because it's consensual. That's the game we're playing.
Right.
When we're out there playing basketball on the court, I want to not only score on them, I want to humiliate them. I want them to leave.
It's your killer.
It's my killer. And then I want to jokingly, with a big smile on my face, remind them of what I've stolen from them and they will never get back. And just laugh and laugh and laugh, and that joy that I get to have from that consensual play that we've had, and also in all of the different ways in which I've competed, has allowed that expression of my masculinity to be available to me. So that is kind of a prerequisite. And I really applaud the work that the Sacred Sons are doing.
Mm-hmm.
We may do a collaboration with them, which is men's work, where they really employ a lot of ritual combat, where you actually get to experience like what it's like. And Charles Eisenstein recently went to one of their summits, and he wrote a great essay called I Like to Fight, which was he got into a ritual combat, boxing, and like recognized how much fight was in him and how much he actually desired not to, and claimed it.
Yeah.
And like really, and he was pitted against an even opponent, and he had brothers there who were playing the drums and like really kind of creating a moment. And I think it's really necessary for men to understand that and have that expression, and all people really who want to understand their own dominance. And I actually even see it in the feminine, because of course we're a spectrum of polarity, right? Like we have our masculine and feminine. And I actually see a lot more shadow competition in everybody. But because women don't compete typically in athletics the same way that men do, and this is a generalization based on the aggregate, there's a shadow competition that comes in, competition about looks or competition about this other things. Whereas with men who really compete full out, like we lay it out, we try to destroy each other. So when it comes to celebrating each other's victories off the field or off the court or whatever, it's like, fuck yeah, bro. Like, good job, man. Like all of that competition has been expressed and been allowed to flourish. And so the shadow competition isn't there, you know, for all of my brothers who I get to step into that sacred contest. My best friend, Aaron Rodgers, like we fucking go at it constantly. 60% of what we talk about is talking shit to each other. And it actually is so much that it makes people uncomfortable. We were recently in Vail and we would get on just rolls and rants going back and forth, and we just literally see people getting uncomfortable and then like picking up sides with whoever was, but that's like, and like the acceleration of our love and friendship because of that has just gone exponentially.
Because
so
you trust him.
That's
how you build
him.
Trust.
And when I watch him compete and play, like the ecstasy of watching him come back and beat the Cowboys this year when I was there at the game and knowing what he was going through, like the ecstasy of that level of celebration of another is only possible, I think, when you actually get to exercise all of that stuff of like, oh man, he's really killing it. And what am I doing with my life? Like none of that fucking exists. You just get to play all of that out in the play space of competition, which is very much like the play space of sexuality that you're creating, which is a safe container to put that in. And sometimes, it does push triggers and push buttons where there's emotional flare. And that's part of the medicine of it.
Designed for that.
Exactly.
To alchemize, it becomes an alchemical laboratory where it's actually designed to transmute that which you imagine you don't want to interact with because it's dangerous, let's say, and it actually bears gifts that you would never be able to otherwise access. And that is, that's the great reveal. It's like, I also really love the work of Carolyn Elliott, who wrote Existential Kink. And I'm thinking about that while you're talking about these guys, right? Who, if you don't have a healthy relationship to your predator, you're going to be in combat with your life. Like you will eroticize the dimensions of your struggle in life unconsciously, thinking you hate whatever's going on at your job or in your partnership or whatever. And you can render that conscious and then put things in the space that you want to sort of see move, right? That you want to see transform. And obviously that's what you can do in a BDSM container as well. You can take something that might be holding a lot of energy for you, right? So whether it's like a dynamic you had with a parent, or it's some struggle that you have in, your interpersonal life or whatever, and you can literally like put it on the altar, right? As an offering, and then it can be alchemized into pleasure, into, the the grand field of like vital force energy, and you leave empowered, right? You bring a yes to the places in your inner world that are a no, that of course are holding all of the tension of that resistance. And you have the power to do that and to walk away a full fuck yes to whoever it is that you are. That wholeness is what so many people describe from, this world.
Yeah. When I think about, my role and the teachings of being submissive, I think of first in the field of, consensual athletic play. And I think of jujitsu.
Right.
And I think of the first time I went on the mats with Kyle Kingsbury, who many people who follow this podcast, you might know, one of my best friends on the earth, jiu-jitsu black belt, 8 fights in the UFC, 6'4", 240. Like he's
oh my God, he sounds like my next husband.
He's a monster.
I'm ready to give him my number.
And such a sweetie, but a fucking monster. And he literally could do anything he wanted to me on the mat. And he would tap me out, and then we'd go at it again full force, and he would gently squeeze me until I was, if he wanted, he could have taken my life or broken my arm or whatever.
But
and
that's
I tap
hierarchy.
out. Exactly.
That's hierarchy. And you understand him to be higher on the hierarchy.
Yes, in that realm. But it taught me, and I think this is why I get along with people who've played in this arena, because they've not only learned how to be dominant, they've not only learned how to squeeze to the point where someone has to tap out, but they've also played the other side where you actually recognize, like, I have to submit. There's a force out here greater than me. And you can apply that to God.
Yeah.
There's a force out here greater than me. Gaia, Mama Nature. It could be the waves in Hawaii, or it could be somebody else on the mat. But sometimes you have to just bow and say, that force is greater than me. And
that's maybe the only way you could dom well, is to know what it is to submit, to know what it is to inhabit the other polarity within your own energy field.
Right. So this is setting like the preconditions, I think, for a healthy expression into this field where you can actually, play the dom role well. And for me, something else was unlocked. Fortunately, we have a very sexually liberated, open mind container with my wife. So we brought in a professional dom, and it wasn't sexual.
Right.
It was sensual.
Yeah.
But it wasn't sexual. And it was for the purpose of our growth.
Yes.
And she was reflecting to me those things that I didn't want to be submissive to. Right. Yeah. So the first was, she shocked me really quick because she had, long nails. She ripped across my chest, and I thought she might have ripped my fucking nipple off. I was like, there goes my nipple. I'm a one nipple. From now, I'm the one nippled man. Like, here I am. I was like, holy shit. And talking to her later, she's like, I knew I needed to get your attention. I needed you to know that this lioness has claws. Like, this isn't a game. Because the first thing that she did was she tried to put a collar around my neck, but my neck was too big and my traps were too big. And so I just kind of smiled and laughed like, yeah, your little collar's made for a kitty cat, not a lion. So I gave this little like glib little laugh. And she's like, all right. So she gets some ropes and she accomplishes it with another tool. She's an absolute professional, just a true master, right? And then right after that, as I'm tied up, and she actually tied up my neck and my hands in like a prayer position. And then she ripped across, and I was like, oh shit, like this is real. Totally changed my mindset. And from there, it was like, all right, just radical submission, whatever she was going to do. And she was playing with me verbally and physically and all these different things. But the big part of it was my fear is not being able to please a woman because I didn't have an erection or I wasn't able to do it. So she was playing out this scenario where I wasn't erect and I couldn't please her, but actually she alchemized it by getting pleasure from my inability to please, from actually just having to stay there and not be able to do anything and be what would be my most emasculating fear, which is I'm not hard, I can't please. And even though sex wasn't even on the table, she told me later, she's like, you're not supposed to get hard unless the moment is actually inviting that to come through. And that moment wasn't there. So this is the lesson. And her, as an evolved sexual priestess, understood, like, I can get pleasure from this. I can get pleasure from any expression as long as it's, true. And so she went into multiple energetic orgasms over my absolute flaccidness,
Right.
what I would consider impotence, quote, beforehand. And it really reframed and recalibrated this whole, these whole dynamics that I've carried, and it's diminished over time, but it used to be really strong when I was younger. If I couldn't please my girlfriend or my lover, I was like devastated, and just really reframed it. And there's this deep freedom that just came over my whole being.
It as you're describing it, it feels like really transforming the appeaser, right? So that little boy energy of like, please mommy or else, right, can get so woven in, as we've been discussing, with that erotic performance agenda, right? And so when you decouple the appeasement intentionality of your erotic interaction, then you're just there. Yeah. And you're just two people having a consensual experience that involves being whatever is here, right, for yourself. And there's relaxing that agenda means that you can be present, you can be attuned, and you can offer your attention, which when you're in performance, you're not in your body.
No.
And then you can't offer your partner anything.
You're giving them a fraction of your
illusory
fuck. A fraction of your fuck.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And so after that, after I moved through that submissive, then actually Vailana came into the bed. Well, she was in there, she was observing, and then came in, and we got to make love, and it was incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, it was actually the liberation.
Did you film that or you didn't? That's not disappointing. Okay.
And in that, it was like, it was a deeper level of presence, because there was a subconscious program that was always like, all right, well, you're doing good, but make sure you keep doing good here. It was I had a very, and still do, and I'm not saying this is one thing, but I could see that I had this very telerotic inclination. So telos being a direction, like there was a direction to my lovemaking, that there was an outcome, and the outcome typically involved orgasms, and not always necessarily for me, but typically always, for the feminine. That was like part of this line. What my teacher, Rabbi Mark Gaffney would say is like line sexing, which is like having a goal oriented in mind. And there was always this subconscious thing, like I will fail the goal if I fail in my performance. And that little bit kept me out of the radical presence where full eros got to flourish and really bloom in the full flower of what was available between us.
Because you visited with the failure, right? You allowed that to be alchemized in the space. Like, what is that failure holding? Like, what's the gift behind that bracing against that failure? It's powerful.
And I think it was also one of the things that attracted me to the Dom space to begin with, because I was able to kind of very naturally actually adopt that in a very kind of natural way. But there was also a strategy, I think, subconsciously to that in the Dom space, I was able to control the circumstances and weave any aspect of my own performance and just weave that into the game itself. Right. So I had many different moves that were available that didn't necessarily involve me ever getting hard or me ever doing anything. It could all be part of the game that I was orchestrating. And so there was like a little bit of like, okay, like I'm safe in this. I'm safe from my failure of performance because I know how to play the game, and the game itself is what's so rich in that, is the dynamic itself. And I knew that I could hold the dynamic to keep that erotic tension and to keep that kind of flourishing eros alive. So it was kind of I think there was both an allurement to that position and also a draw to it to be actually safer in that position because of my own fear of failure of performance.
Right. And so how do you work with your native, impulse to control circumstances so that you feel safe and actually render that the point of like it's exposing it, right? So if as a woman, what I actually want is to feel safe in a sexual dynamic with a man, how do I actually own the fact that that's what I want? As a man, how do you own that you actually want to feel in control? Mm-hmm. And how do we work with that not we, but how do we work with that consciously?
Right.
Does a couple work with that, partners consciously, so that you can recognize that that's actually your agenda? It is, and that's totally cool. It should be actually your agenda to feel empowered, in control, and to source from the experience your own competence. And as a woman, how do I own the fact that I want to feel guided? I want to feel, again, contained, which means safe, grounded. I want to be in the presence of a bigger energy, and I want to go inward. I want to explore this incredible terrain of my feminine vessel and be there, right, in bliss. And I don't really want to be in the programming of my caretaker, which is this fake giving of oh, I wonder if he's cool. I wonder if he's tired. I wonder if he's having a good time. And oh, do I look hot? How's my hair? That's just enough. Enough of that. Just to exhale and relax all of that and recognize that your roles are predicated on these pre-existing agendas. That's totally cool. And how do you, it sounds like you leveled up, you went from one entry level, perhaps orientation towards the container, and you took it even a higher step by acknowledging that there was something for you to alchemize there, right? Which is this fear of failure and of course / performance related self-worth coupling.
Sure. Yeah. The spiritual component of it too is there's a way that it mirrors our orientation to the divine. And I think I kind of mentioned that as well, is when you're actually treated like a god, you have the power of a god, it evokes your godhood.
Yes.
It really, when the feminine, which is all of creation, which extends to the whole world, when the world is yes, I'm here for you, take me. And I trust you. Then you become trustable. It's like what Lao Tzu said, trust them and they become trustworthy. Yes. At that point, my own divinity comes online in this really beautiful way, in the totality of my divinity, again, where the demon and the Buddha, meet, where the demon and the Christ meet, where the demon and the angel meet, that point of the full reclamation of my full divinity, then it actually evokes my divinity. And then in the submissive play, it's actually submission and surrender to the great mystery, to the divine goddess herself. And in that surrender, you actually understand your place in the cosmos.
That's right.
And understand God in a way.
It constellates, the whole. And I would say, I think you'd agree that the trust factor, right? So trust and, he will become trustworthy. It begins with this deep self-trust. You can't really engage in this kind of container with full consent unless you have a relationship to yourself where you are in trust of yourself, right? Where a lot of what I learned in the intensive I recently went to was how honestly immature my power of consent still is, right? Because I don't yet have a very strong, intimate relationship with my no, right? And so if I really trust myself sufficiently where my no is surfaced and expressed to a dom immediately, that's my responsibility as a submissive, is that my no is expressed, my yes is expressed.
Right.
That's it, right? That's my offering, right? Is the energetic translation of my inner embodied experience. And if I don't have a relationship that is trusting with my no, such that I would use a safe word, for example, readily, then I'm not actually consenting. I'm not actually participating. So first comes this relationship with the self of self-knowledge, self-awareness, self-intimacy, and then that again, inner, the right action, that comes from that awareness.
One of the levels that I think, I haven't fully explored to fruition is taking psychological concepts and understanding that, okay, potentially, here's Kelly, and Kelly needs to get in stronger contact with her verbal no.
Right.
Right. So I'll always be listening for the subtle subtext of this is maybe no. And then then I back off the pressure, right? So I'm always listening for the no that doesn't need to be expressed. And that's a very fun way to play, right? Because you're always feeling, oh, there's a little more, there's a little, okay, here's where it's, but I never push it consciously to say, actually, the point here is for you to actually come into contact with your no. In what you've learned, would something like that be better done as like setting it up in advance and saying like, hey, we're going to push this till you find your no? Or would it be actually, all right, I have a hidden agenda, but for this actually to have power, it can't be expressed. Otherwise the game is overt and it's not actually evoking the kind of natural response there. So it's, I guess my question would be, and the question that would be to, your teachers would be basically, if that was an idea of like, all right, I think finding the no is important here. So I'm actually intentionally going to push past this and then reveal my intentions afterwards. It seems like to me, like that's scary. That's like high risk to play with that. And there has to be a really deep level of trust. But is it typically start with, hey, we're going to do this until you find your no? Or is it just, all right, we're going to do this and we're going to wait for the no to come?
I love this question. So what I've understood is that, I'll speak as a woman on behalf of women, is that it's very challenging for us to express a no without anger. And that is something that we have the opportunity to develop nervous system capacity around. Like, what is it to say no when somebody's not bad and wrong? What is it to say no when there isn't that energy of like protecting myself entitlement, when the victim triangle isn't active? And so in these spaces, what I've learned is that first you start with, again, learning about yourself. So if you're working with impact play, you learn where your no is because you learn what your 10 scale, right? Like if when you're flogged and it feels like you're 7, but then your 8 is a no, you don't like it. That's all it is. That's what a boundary is, a preference, right? So when you get to your I don't like this and you tag it as an 8, then you communicate with your partner. You both learn what your no is. And so it's already encoded, like it's written, right? So you might use the numbers like in a scene, which sounds like unsexy or whatever, but it just becomes part of it.
Yeah, when I was being dommed, actually, in this part, she moved into impact play and she hit me hard. And then she asked me, she's like, what is that? What is that 1 to 10? And I said, 3. She hits me harder and hard. And I go, 4. 4 goddess. I felt like mistress sounded weird, so I used goddess in my I don't know why, but that was just what made the most sense.
Could have been mommy. Whatever.
Yeah. So I said 4 goddess, and she saw that actually in that she could have tried to escalate it to 10 and really fucking wound up and got some harsher tool or something like that, but instead, she saw that actually my orientation to that, there wasn't something there that I was afraid of. So she actually just goes, good boy. And then stopped. It was like she was testing to see like if I was going to go like 8,
if there's something
9, or
there.
like and not actually acknowledging my ability to handle, something that was intense. So she intuitively was like, all right, nothing for you, not enough for me to pursue that avenue. In this thing, because I don't have this kind of fragility to work with in this space.
Whereas somebody who was spanked as a child, right? They might enter into a scene where they explore that switch point, right? Like, Omar Pani talks about how it can be like from deeply pleasurable to fuck no in like 1 second, right? Like just a little bit more sensation. And so you would explore where that switch point is. And, I was taught that first you go into the exploratory territory and then you go into your enactment of the no, right? So then maybe in a future scene, you might have, the understanding going into the scene that you're going to, when you get to your no, like, kick and scream and push the person off of you or whatever, like where you reclaim that opportunity to kick, scream, and say no that you didn't have as a child. And you experience that empowerment in a safe container with somebody that you trust. But, you could also start with very basic scenes where you just have an understanding where you're saying no to everything. There's going to be, like the safe word we worked with is yellow, right? So you're going to yellow out the whole scene, right? So every single touch, like this, yellow, like this, yellow, like this, yellow, like, and you just are practicing, you're toning like that muscle, even when it feels silly, right? Like even when it feels like, well, this isn't hot, right? So there's so many ways to enter into developing the relationship, but the less mind reading, the more empowering and potentially alchemical it's going to be, I think, at the beginning, right? So I do think it's like more advanced play for like a dom to design an entire scene, knowing what he thinks the sub needs. Like, at least for me, it's important for me at this stage to know what I need and to direct, what is being like offered and provided. But I do think it makes sense to like visit with the experience, like reenact the experience. Let's say if it's stemming from a childhood experience. And, there's a lot in controversial area, but in parent-child play that you can bring into, this work. And one of the teachers at the intensive I was just at, Lori Handler's, she very boldly shared, her experiences of using BDSM to alchemize like covert sexual tension that she felt with her father that was never acted on, but she felt it, right? And so the gaslight that came from the conflicts between them throughout her childhood and adolescence was resolved when she had an experience, with a partner where she could actually play out her father's attraction to her and her attraction to her father, which many would argue is universal, especially in the father-daughter dynamic. It's not the same for mothers and sons, right? So what a woman wants from her father is the same thing she wants from her man. What a son wants from his mommy, he does not want from his woman. It's not fundamentally the same kind of erotic dynamic, eroticized dynamic. And so like, to really play that out, I mean, it sounds, I would have been like, what? Like even 3 years ago, like, oh my God, I can't believe I just heard that. And now it's like, I just have had so much admiration for her sharing this, to expand the permission field for all of us to even consider what it is to bring a yes to the most taboo, the most heinous, and arguably the most universal dynamic energies of our childhoods. And then later, if you had an experience of sexual abuse, you could bring like that royal, righteous, empowered, embodied no, to the reenactment. But I did think it makes a lot of sense when I was learning about this, to first go into it with a yes.
Yeah. One example is from a book I read on kind of the kink BDSM space, and I can't recall the title of the book right now, but they told a story of a woman of color who played out like a racially charged racial slur scene. Right, in the dom subspace as a way to alchemize her experience of racism in the regular world. And that seems like such an intense and taboo and delicate place to go. It like I'm like fuck no, like I would never want to play that.
Glad you said it, not me.
Play that role out, right? Yeah. But I also see and can see and understand the power of the reclamation of that in this
choosing what has already occurred.
Exactly.
Right. And so if you just think of how many of us are so sexually fucked up, right? Like, and have had overt, in my clinical practice, 100% of the women that I worked with had sexual abuse histories, literally. And so when you think about that and you think about this possibility to create a safe space out of that which, from the outside in should only look dangerous, right? As a submissive, you're with a man who's in control and you've actually given him that control, like that's not going to go well, right? How do you create the conditions of safety in the same space as that which was a violation, right? Like how do you actually choose, but on your terms and with your consent, that which on a bodily level you've been rejecting arguably your entire adult life? And so, to bring these kinds of reenactments of like highly charged shame-related material, it's a form of reclamation. It's a form of deep embodied, right? Because you're using your body, the technology of your body to render that alchemy. You can't do it just with your mind. You can't do it through books and blogs and conversations. And when you bring your body and you bring even your sensual and erotic energy to bear, you've created a crucible that is unmatched. And I do think that's why there is, an agenda against man-woman relating and the undermining of this this polarity-based dynamic and why it serves so much of what's going on right now in the world. Because when we don't have this technology at our disposal, when we're confused about what it is that we can choose that might otherwise look to us as, compromising all of the efforts of the feminist agenda, then we are really without one of the greatest forms of healing that's available to us.
And to repattern and reclaim through with pleasure present and being aware of, you referenced existential kink, being aware of the kink of these expressions, the expressions of self-defilement, that you've played out with partners unconsciously that has been really damaging, but play out self-defilement in a conscious way as just one aspect of the space, and to play it out and then allow yourself the freedom to feel the pleasure of like, wow, I enjoy being desecrated.
Totally.
Legitimately desecrated.
And constrained. I mean, one of the big things that I recognized is how much I have enjoyed and wanted to be with men who constrain me. This is my narrative, right? Like they don't want me, to do certain things, or like they keep a sort of like, I don't know, controlling a grid for me to live within and fight against, right? Like I will post the dance video, even if you don't want me to, kind of a thing. And this adolescent rebellious energy comes online. Like I will wear this shirt, even though you think it's inappropriate. I will become like this big and this successful in my life or in this community or whatever it is. And he doesn't like it, let's say. When I recognize I actually want to be constrained, right? Like just take an example of a very jealous male partner that a woman might have, like super jealous, right? And he's like always sort of like on edge about that. And you might think like, oh God, it's like so fatiguing to be with somebody so unenlightened, like who can't understand, like it's one love or whatever, But maybe you actually need and semi-consciously want that constraint. First of all, because you don't trust yourself otherwise to navigate your own impulses. And second of all, because you don't know how to choose that constraint, right? In the form of containment and submission.
Yeah.
And so when we unconsciously engage this, it's still there, right? The dynamics are still there. I was even thinking the other day, like, I wonder if one of the reasons why some folks, and I've been this in the past, like don't have money, like can't afford it, is because they fundamentally don't trust their own impulses, right? Because, I'm at a stage in my life where I want something, I buy it, right? Like I want to do something, I do it. So the translation of my impulses to, the experience of my lived life is instantaneous, right? Whereas if I were saving up for a voice lesson for months, I really have a relationship with my impulse to take a voice lesson that is like very almost cautious, right? And constrained. And it's maybe what is wanted, right? So like you just have a totally different lens on like why that financial destitution might be at play and how it's actually serving a kink, right? So,
So in that desire to be constrained or the desire to be radically unconstrained and held in the full expression of your wild Kali, your full Shakti. And, Vailana and I facilitate a particular type of ceremony. We don't really talk about this very much, but it's part of like the inner, kind of circle of the work that we do just for close friends and allies on the path. And we offer Vailana and I a full day dedicated to a ceremonial practice with one person, male or female, doesn't matter. And done, many different expressions come out. And it's not a sexual type of ceremony. It's a medicine ceremony. And in that, one of the interesting things that I've found is and I think it was 3 out of the last 4 women who are very empowered women. Some of them, shamans and medicine, medicine carriers of different sorts. The medicine work is very deep. And again, I'm keeping this intentionally private. And I know people will want more details about it, but this is kind of a very inner circle thing that someday, I'll share about more publicly. One of the things that comes online is I'm really in that space. I'm polarizing to the extreme level of the divine masculine, of like the Christed self, radical, unconditional love, like radical. And we're doing body work. Body work is a part of it because, of course, the soma carries the record of so much different, challenge and trauma and the memory of the body that's actually really inseparable and indifferent from the mind itself. So in that process, there was several times an expression of this radical dark feminine that would come out. And I could tell that, and, hissing and like what would typically, like the typical response from a, Catholic kind of perspective is, wow, that's a fucking demon and we need to exorcise
yeah.
right? So like, this is bad. That's a demon. Let's exorcise it. And whenever that came online, I could see that that expression that would move through them, almost like channeled through them, would be to test me and see if it could scare me. So like hiss right up against my ear or my face, and and I would just intuitively in that space, polarized intentionally in the divine masculine, just go, welcome to the garden. Like, welcome, sweetheart.
I love that you're crazy.
Yeah, like welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome, goddess. Like, welcome to the garden. And in that place, when that part was trusted, that wild expression, their whole body just relaxes. And they're like, oh my God, I'm fucking safe.
That's the permission field.
I'm fucking safe because I've shown the fullness of my darkness, the thing that's the most ugly, the thing that's the most scary, the thing that's been the most repressed. This Kali, I've shown that, and all that was received, like Shiva. One hand, again, and if you're not watching the YouTube, sorry about this, we have a beautiful statue of Kali standing on Shiva, and Shiva's just looking up at her with her red tongue and her necklace full of skulls and a variety of weapons and severed heads with collecting blood in the bottom. And he's looking up at her and going like, aren't you beautiful, baby? I love you. And that expression then allows the fullness of the divine feminine, the full feminine. And I say divine again, where the angel and the demon meet, the fullness of the feminine to relax, and some deep, deep healing comes on the backside of that expression.
And her heart wisdom is then available.
For sure. And there's a softness that is like a softness that's a new level, and a cathartic softness of like, oh, fuck, this is what I've really been looking for in this expression.
Right. And so what it takes for a man not to contract in the face of that requires also that he is in a practice of not contracting around his own inner wild ugly.
Yep.
Right. And so that's a tall order. It's not something we can prescribe, certainly. And it can only be modeled, right? Because when you are in the presence of a nervous system that you can co-regulate with, which is what should have happened with proper attachment as children with our, caregivers and our mother, you can't unknow that. Like your system then knows it, right? So even that one instance of co-regulation that you might have offered that woman, she's going to be able to draw from that, for the rest of her life. It's that significant. And I do think this is, again, what we as women require from the men in our midst. And I don't know that we've set them up to offer it. And I think we have an opportunity to course correct around that.
Let's go. Kelly, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show, have you be a part of this Fit for Service container. Thank you. Just to know that, you have an ally always. And you have a man that if they come for you with the pitchforks and the burning torches, like, I'll be there.
I need that. Thank you.
I'll be there. Yeah. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Kelly, is there anything else you'd like to offer? Anything you'd like to point people to who've been moved by this? Well,
now that we're getting logistical, yes. I just started a podcast.
Amazing.
It's called Reclamation Radio. And I came out the gate on these topics. And I felt a little like, I don't know, about feminism and interview with Omar Pani, et cetera. Hello, my love. And it's been so well received that I feel like, yes, we're in a zeitgeist, like it's happening.
Yeah.
There's like almost no pushback at all. So I'm excited about it. Yeah.
The evolution and transformation of consciousness is underway.
It's nigh.
It's nice.
So thank you, brother.
Yeah, of course, sis. Much love, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me at Aubrey Marcus. Check out the Aubrey Marcus podcast, available everywhere. And leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.